They say everyone has a moment that fractures their life clean in two, a before and an agonizing after. For some, it's the sudden bloom of love, the sharp cry of a newborn. For me, it was the echoing silence deep beneath the earth. The moment the familiar damp darkness of the abyssal maw became something else entirely, something predatory and ancient. It was the instant the torchlight caught the slick, pale movement where no movement should be, and the subsequent sound, a wet, clicking skitter that ripped through the profound quiet and heralded the end of the life I knew, the end of my friend, Jago. Before that echo faded, my world had irrevocably split. My name is Corvus Blackwood. Used to be, my world was the dark. I was search and rescue, SAR, specialized in cave systems, not the tourist paths with railings and soft lights, but the deep, uncharted veins of the planet. The squeeze-throughs barely wider than your shoulders, the vertical drops into absolute blackness, the labyrinths where compasses spin uselessly and your only guide is the map etched in your own mind, the feel of the rock under your fingertips, the subtle shift in airflow. It's a hostile beauty down there, demanding respect, punishing arrogance. You learn to move differently, think three-dimensionally. Trust senses sight often renders irrelevant. Jago Vance was my partner in that subterranean world. We weren't just colleagues. We were lifelines, tethered together in places where a single mistake means you become part of the geology. He had a calm that settled my own occasional jitters, a knack for finding the path when I saw only dead ends. We'd pulled shivering hikers from forgotten crevices, mapped tunnels unseen for millennia, shared stale protein bars in chambers vast enough to swallow cathedrals. There's a bond forged in that kind of shared risk, relying on someone else's competence when your own life hangs by a carabiner and a knot tied in the cold dark. The abyssal maw was our local nightmare, a sprawling karst system notorious for swallowing the unwary. Its reputation was woven into local folklore, tales of strange echoes, of people going in and never coming out, or coming out, changed. We treated it with professional caution, of course, but the legends were just background noise, the kind of stories that cling to any place sufficiently deep and dangerous. We knew its main arteries, its known hazards, the places where the rock itself seemed to groan under the weight of the mountains above. It was a place you respected, profoundly. Mastering cave rescue isn't about brute strength. It's about control, patience, and an almost unnatural comfort with confined spaces and sensory deprivation. It's about interpreting the silence, distinguishing the drip of water from the scuffle of loose scree, reading the story told by a displaced pebble or a scuff mark on limestone. You learn to trust your gut when the map says one thing, but the cold draft whispering from a crack says another. It's an intimate dance with an environment that couldn't care less if you live or die, demanding absolute focus and an acceptance of the inherent vulnerability. We trained constantly, rehearsing rescues and simulated collapses, practicing vertical ascents and descents until the rope work was muscle memory. Jago had this uncanny ability to gauge rock stability just by tapping it, listening to the resonance. I was the navigator, the one who could visualize the unseen tunnels connecting the chambers, holding the complex map in my head even when visibility dropped to zero from silt stirred up in underground pools. We were a good team, complementing each other's strengths, covering weaknesses. We thought we were prepared for anything the maw could throw at us. That belief, that comfortable competence built over years of successful missions, was perhaps the most dangerous thing we carried down there. The maw had secrets far older and hungrier than simple geological hazards. The local whispers weren't just stories. They were warnings we hadn't truly listened to. We were experts in navigating the physical labyrinth, utterly ignorant of the biological nightmare nesting within its deepest, unplumbed recesses. The darkness we thought we knew was merely a veil. Looking back, the signs were probably there on previous descents, ignored or rationalized away. An unusual patch of silence where cave crickets should have been chirping. A temperature drop too sudden, too localized. Maybe even a scent. Faint and wrong, dismissed as stagnant water or mineral deposits. The complacency of familiarity is a subtle killer. You see what you expect to see. Filter out the anomalies that don't fit your understanding of the world. Until, one day, the anomaly refuses to be ignored. The routine call came on a Tuesday. Two experienced spelunkers overdue from a deep exploration trip into the Maw's less-traveled western tunnels. Standard procedure: gear up, notify Surface Command, descend into the familiar gloom. We felt the usual professional tension, the low hum of adrenaline that precedes any rescue operation, but no real premonition. It was just another descent, another problem to solve methodically. The Maw waited, patient and silent, ready to teach us the true meaning of darkness, a lesson paid for in blood and sanity. The descent began like countless others, checking harnesses, locking carabiners with satisfying clicks, the rhythmic scrape of boots on rock, the beam of headlamps cutting cones of light through the damp air. Comms crackled initially, relaying our progress to the surface team, but the deeper we went, the more the rock drank the signal, stretching the tether to the sunlit world until it snapped entirely. We were alone, enveloped by the immense, indifferent silence of the Earth's bowels. It was a familiar isolation, usually comforting in its focus. This time it felt different, heavy, watchful. We followed the spelunkers' intended route, marked occasionally by reflectors they'd placed. Standard practice, but deeper in, maybe 3 kilometers past the last known safe point, things felt off. The usual faint sounds of dripping water seemed muted, the air still and unnaturally cold. Even the familiar scent of wet limestone and mineral deposits was overlaid with something else, a faint, cloying sweetness like overripe fruit mixed with something vaguely metallic, coppery. Jago noticed it too, his head cocked, sniffing the air, his usual calm replaced by a frown etched deep by his headlamp's glare. We found their last marker near the entrance to a tight squeeze-through, a notorious passage called the Rib Cracker. No sign of them beyond it. Protocol dictated we proceed cautiously. I went first, wriggling through the narrow opening, the rock pressing intimately against my chest and back. Emerging into a larger chamber beyond, my headlamp beam swept across damp, glistening walls and stopped. Not on the missing spelunkers. On the floor near the far wall was a scattering of debris, torn fabric, a shattered helmet, something that looked horribly like a climbing boot, shredded, and drag marks, deep gouges in the muddy floor leading towards a fissure barely visible in the shadows. "Jago," I sub-vocalized into my mic, keeping my voice low, tight. "Got sign. Bad sign. Looks like an attack." His voice came back, strained. "Animal? Cave bear?" There hadn't been bears in these systems for centuries. "Negative," I whispered back, my light playing over the disturbing scene. "Something else." That's when I heard it. Not from the fissure, but from the ceiling above me. A soft, wet, click-click skitter. My blood turned to ice water. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I tilted my headlamp upwards. 2 pinpricks of milky, sightless white reflected the light, set in a narrow, bone-pale head attached to a body that seemed impossibly long and segmented, clinging upside down to the rock like some monstrous, multi-jointed insect. Before I could scream a warning, Jago squeezed through the passage behind me. The thing dropped. It didn't fall. It descended with controlled, terrifying speed, landing silently between us. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but hideously wrong. Limbs bent at unnatural angles, skin the color of bleached bone, utterly devoid of eyes but with large, complex auditory pits flanking its narrow skull. It unfolded, rising to a height easily exceeding 2 meters, its movements jerky yet fluid, utterly silent except for the faint wet clicking emanating from its complex mandibles. Jago raised his emergency flare gun, a desperate last resort. The attack was blindingly fast. The creature didn't roar. It emitted a high-frequency shriek that overloaded my senses, making the rock itself seem to vibrate. It lunged, not at me, but at Jago. One elongated, chitinous arm, tipped with needle-sharp claws, lashed out. I saw the flare gun fly from his hand, heard a choked gasp, then a sickening, wet, tearing sound that has replayed in my nightmares ever since. His headlamp clattered to the floor, its beam spinning crazily, illuminating fragments of a horror I couldn't fully process. Pale limbs moving with blurring speed, dark splashes against the white rock. My SAR training, the years of drills, the ingrained instinct for self-preservation in lethal environments, took over. There was no fighting that thing. My mind screamed, "Escape!" I scrambled backwards, crab-walking towards the rib cracker, the only way out. The creature, momentarily occupied with Jago, didn't immediately pursue, but the clicking intensified, turning into a low, guttural chittering. I shoved myself into the narrow passage, scraping skin and gear, the sounds from the chamber fading slightly behind me, replaced by the frantic pounding of my own heart against the confining rock. The journey back was a blur of primal terror fueled by adrenaline. I didn't dare use my main light, relying on the dimmest red setting, navigating by touch and memory through passages that now felt infinitely more threatening. Every shadow seemed to move. Every drip of water sounded like the clicking pursuit. I imagined those pale limbs unfolding behind me, those sightless sensors locking onto my heat signature, my panicked breathing. Claustrophobia, never truly an issue before, became a physical entity, pressing in, stealing my breath. I wasn't just escaping the cave, I was escaping it, somehow numb and trembling, covered in mud. Blood, mine, Jago's. I clawed my way back to the wider tunnels, back towards the faint promise of the surface. The silence behind me was absolute now, which was somehow even more terrifying than pursuit. Hours later, I stumbled out into the disorienting brightness of daylight, collapsing into the arms of the surface crew. My initial report was incoherent, a babble about impossible creatures, about Jago. Gone. They sedated me. The official story became a sudden, localized cave-in, a tragic accident. My conflicting account, chalked up to trauma, hypoxia, shock. No one believed the monster in the dark. I was alive, Jago wasn't, and I was utterly alone with the horrifying truth. The aftermath was a personal hell, painted in shades of gray and suffocating darkness. Officially, Jago was lost to the indifferent geology of the maw. Unofficially, I knew he was torn apart by something impossible, something ripped from the deepest, darkest pit of primal fear. The commendations for my survival felt like ashes in my mouth. Sleep offered no escape, only replays of clicking mandibles and Jago's final choked gasp, often jolting me awake in my cramped apartment, convinced the pale thing was clinging to my own ceiling. The familiar comfort of enclosed spaces, my former sanctuary, became a trigger for paralyzing panic attacks. Caves were unthinkable. Even elevators felt like traps. I quit SAR. The thought of descending back into the earth, even into a safe training facility, was unbearable. I drifted, taking meaningless jobs, night security, warehouse stocking, anything that kept me above ground and required minimal human interaction. Friends tried to reach out. SAR colleagues offered condolences laced with pitying disbelief. But how could I explain? How could I articulate the wrongness of that creature, the intelligent, predatory nature hidden behind those milky, sightless sensors? I drank too much, trying to drown the clicking sounds that echoed in the quiet moments, trying to blur the edges of the memory seared onto my brain. Isolation became my shield and my prison. He found me 6 months later in a dimly lit bar on the edge of town where I was nursing a cheap whiskey and trying to ignore the tremor in my hands. He looked utterly out of place. Sharp suit, expensive shoes, an air of quiet authority that cut through the bar's stale despair. He sat down opposite me, didn't order anything, just watched me with eyes that seemed to see far too much. "Corvus Blackwood," he said, his voice calm, level. Not a question. "We need to discuss what truly happened to Jago Vance in the Abyssal Maw." My blood ran cold. I almost bolted, thinking he was some kind of internal affairs investigator, ready to pin Jago's death on my hallucinations. But he just slid a slim, unmarked data slate across the sticky table. "My name is Valerius Kane, Director, Aegis Institute." I hesitated, then tapped the screen. It flickered to life, displaying grainy thermal imaging footage. My breath hitched. It was it, the same impossible creature, moving with that same horrifying, jerky grace through a different cave system, captured by some hidden camera. Clearer images followed. Anatomical diagrams, extrapolated skeletal structures, behavioral analysis notes. The official designation read, Noctivagus horribilis. Common name, Catonian crawler. "They're real Corvus," Kane said softly, "and we hunt them." He explained the Aegis Institute, a private, exceptionally well-funded organization operating entirely outside governmental oversight. Their sole purpose, to identify, study, contain, and, when necessary, eliminate cryptids, biological anomalies that defied conventional science, threats lurking in the shadows of the known world. They knew about the Abyssal Maw incident, had been monitoring similar occurrences globally. They knew my SAR record, my unique skills in subterranean environments. "Most people who encounter these entities don't survive," Kane continued, his gaze unwavering. "Those who do are often broken. But your skills, your intimate knowledge of that environment, make you uniquely valuable." The offer was simple, stark. Join Aegis. Become a scout for one of their elite hunter-killer teams, the Umbra Cadres. Use my caving expertise not for rescue, but for reconnaissance, infiltration, tracking these things in their own element, leading the team to them. It was dangerous, bordering on suicidal, but it was also validation, proof I wasn't crazy, and it offered something else, something dark and fiercely compelling that flickered to life in the wreckage of my psyche. A chance for answers, a chance to face the darkness that had stolen my friend, my career, my peace. A chance, perhaps, for revenge. I agreed. Training was brutal, conducted in a sprawling, geothermal-powered underground facility deep beneath some remote mountain range. It pushed my physical and mental limits far beyond anything SAR had demanded. Close-quarters combat in simulated cave tunnels, disorientation and sensory deprivation exercises, weapons training with specialized sonic and ballistic ordnance designed to affect cryptid physiology. We studied cryptid biology, attack patterns, environmental weaknesses. I learned about creatures far stranger and more terrifying than the crawler, things that swam in abyssal trenches, things that mimicked human form, things that fed on fear itself. It was a crash course in the planet's secret horrors. It was there I met the rest of Umbra Cadre, Serafina Rostovi, the team lead, ex-Spetsnaz, unnervingly calm with eyes that missed nothing. Baruch Stone, the heavy weapons specialist, a mountain of a man whose gruff exterior hid a brilliant technical mind, scarred by an encounter with some kind of bioluminescent deep-sea horror. Kalen Reese, lithe and silent, former Special Forces recon, expert marksman and tracker, haunted by a run-in with a shape-shifting entity in the Amazon. And Lysandra Thorne, the analyst, wickedly smart, coordinating missions from the base, her academic background in fringe zoology finding a practical, lethal application here. Before our first mission together, Serafina initiated the cadre's ritual. We gathered in a sterile briefing room, sharing drinks. One by one, they told their stories, not boastfully, but quietly, factually. Baruch's disastrous dive, Kalen's jungle pursuit, Serafina's Arctic hunt gone wrong. Shared trauma as a bonding agent. When it was my turn, I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I managed only the barest outline, the maw, the crawler, Jago. No one pressed. They just nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. For the first time since crawling out of the maw, I didn't feel entirely alone. I was part of something terrifying, yes, but I wasn't facing the abyss by myself anymore. The weight shifted slightly. The mission alert came abruptly, interrupting a simulation exercise. Lysandra's voice crisp and urgent through the facility speakers, then directly into our earpieces. Umbra Cadre. Mobilization alert. Confirmed Noctivagus horribilis activity, Sector Gamma 7. Remote geological research outpost reporting anomalous seismic readings, equipment damage, and 2 personnel missing, presumed taken. My gut clenched. Another crawler. The location was a newly established geothermal tap station near the caldera of a dormant volcano, riddled with unexplored lava tubes and deep fissures. Perfect crawler territory. The ghosts of the abyssal maw stirred within me, cold fingers tracing my spine. The insertion was fast, efficient. A stealth VTOL deposited us under the cover of a volcanic ash cloud a kilometer from the station. The place was eerily silent, emergency lights casting flickering, unreliable pools of illumination across deserted labs and corridors. Signs of struggle were evident. Overturned equipment, strange, viscous slime trails on the floor, and the same faint, sickly sweet, coppery tang I remembered from the maw. Lysandra confirmed via comms. The remaining station personnel were barricaded in the main reactor control room, terrified, listening to scraping sounds from the vents and service tunnels below. Our target was close. My role kicked in immediately. Equipped with enhanced low-light optics, seismic sensors, and specialized sonic emitters designed to irritate or attract Noctivagus, I led the cadre into the station's sublevels, descending into the network of raw lava tubes the station had intersected. The air grew warmer, thick with the smell of sulfur and that other fouler scent. This was my element, twisted into a nightmare. Navigating the rough, obsidian-like tunnels felt simultaneously familiar and alien. The rock here was different, sharp, glassy, echoing sound strangely. Every shadow seemed deeper, every fissure a potential ambush point. Using the station blueprints overlaid on my helmet display and readings from my handheld sensor array, I identified a larger lava tube chamber roughly beneath the main station structure, the likely lair or hunting nexus. Lysandra, I subvocalized, my voice tight, confirming likely concentration point, setting sonic lures, alpha and beta. Her voice was calm in my ear. Confirmed, Corvus. Lures active. Baruch, Kalen, establish firing positions covering the main ingress points. Serafina, tactical overview. We moved with practiced silence, Baruch hefting his heavy sonic disruptor, Kalen finding a high ledge with his coil gun loaded with electro darts. Serafina positioned herself centrally, directing our fields of fire. The wait was agonizing. Only the faint hum of our gear, the distant drip of water condensing on the cooling rock, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Then, the seismic sensors pinged. Movement, fast, approaching from a deeper fissure. Contact, I whispered. Multiple signatures? No. Single target, complex echo. It's large. The faint clicking started, echoing weirdly off the volcanic glass walls, growing louder, closer. A pale shape detached itself from the oppressive darkness at the far end of the chamber. It was bigger than the one in the maw, limbs longer, carapace thicker, its blind head sweeping side to side, auditory pits quivering as it processed the sonic lure's pulse. It moved into the center of the chamber, sniffing the air, clicking rapidly. "Fire!" Serafina ordered. Baruch unleashed a focused blast from the sonic disruptor. The crawlers shrieked, a piercing wave of agony that resonated in my bones, staggering sideways, disoriented. Kalen fired, electro-darts sinking into its pale hide, making the creature convulse. But it wasn't down. It shook its head, the shriek cutting off abruptly, replaced by that low, furious chittering. Its blind head snapped towards Kalen's position on the ledge. It ignored the sonic pulse now, locking onto the source of the physical attack. Before Kalen could fire again, it launched itself upwards, scrambling up the sheer rock face with impossible speed. "Kalen, evade!" Serafina snapped. He dropped from the ledge just as the crawler's claws slashed through the space he'd occupied, showering sparks from the rock. It landed heavily, momentarily confused by the loss of its target. That was my cue. "Drawing its attention," I yelled, activating a personal high-frequency emitter on my belt and sprinting across the chamber floor, dodging behind a large volcanic bomb remnant. The creature's head whipped towards me, abandoning Kalen. It charged, covering the ground with terrifying speed. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. For a horrifying instant, I saw Jago's last moments superimposed over the charging beast. Panic seized me, rooting me to the spot. "Move, Corvus, move!" My training finally cut through the fear. I dove sideways, rolling behind another outcrop as the crawler smashed into the rock where I'd been standing. The impact cracked the obsidian. Now! I scrambled up a steeper incline using pre-planned handholds, gaining height, making myself a difficult target but exposing its flank. "Baruch, sustained pulse. Kalen, target limb joints," Serafina commanded. The sonic wave hit the crawler again, staggering it as it tried to follow me up the slope. Kalen's darts found their mark, hitting the complex articulation points in its legs. The creature stumbled, roaring in frustration, momentarily pinned. "Corvus, now!" Serafina yelled. I drew my sidearm, loaded with specialized explosive rounds. Taking careful aim at the vulnerable auditory pit nearest me, exposed by its strained position, I fired twice. The rounds impacted with small, contained detonations. The creature convulsed violently, its shrieking reaching an unbearable pitch, then abruptly collapsing in a heap of twitching pale limbs. Silence, absolute and deafening, fell upon the lava tube. The silence stretched, broken only by our ragged breathing and the crackle of static in our earpieces. My hands were shaking, the heavy recoil of the specialized sidearm still buzzing up my arm. Serafina moved forward first, weapon still raised, cautiously approaching the downed crawler. Kalen dropped lightly from his perch, checking his rifle, while Baruch kept his sonic disruptor trained on the motionless heap. "Target neutralized," Serafina finally confirmed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline radiating from all of us. The air still tasted metallic, laced with sulfur and the faint, foul sweetness of the creature. We secured the chamber, setting up a perimeter while waiting for the Aegis retrieval team. Looking at the dead crawler sprawled grotesquely on the volcanic rock, I felt empty. Not triumph, not even relief, just a profound weariness and the hollow ache where Jago's presence used to be. It seemed smaller in death, less like an impossible nightmare, and more like a piece of broken, dangerous biological machinery. The milky, sightless membranes over its sensory pits were ruptured from my shots, leaking a viscous, clear fluid. It was undeniably dead, yet the wrongness of its existence still permeated the air. The Aegis Clean Slate protocol team arrived with unnerving speed and efficiency. Men and women in sterile environmental suits, carrying specialized biocontainment units. They worked silently, documenting the kill site with scanners, taking tissue samples, and then carefully maneuvering the creature's segmented body into a large, reinforced container. Within an hour, it was as if the fight had never happened, save for the scorch marks on the rock and the lingering scent that clung to our gear. They offered curt nods as they sealed the container and prepared for extraction, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. Another specimen for the Institute's labs. As we prepped our own gear for extraction, Baruch approached me. He wordlessly extended a gloved hand. Resting in his palm was a shard of the crawler's claw, about 3 inches long, razor sharp, the color of polished obsidian. Tradition, he grunted, his usual gruffness softened slightly. First kill with the cadre. You earned it, Scout. I took the shard, its surface unnaturally smooth and cool, despite the ambient heat of the lava tube. It felt heavy, substantial, a tangible piece of the nightmare. I pocketed it carefully, the sharp edges pressing against my thigh through the fabric of my pants. Thanks, Baruch. Back at the underground Aegis facility, after debriefing and a mandatory medical check, I found myself in my Spartan quarters. I pulled out the claw shard, turning it over in my hand. It didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a reminder, a promise. Jago was still gone, the hole he left still raw. But the helplessness, the suffocating isolation that had defined my life since the maw, had receded. It was replaced by this grim sense of purpose, this cold understanding that the darkness was real, teeming, and I was now one of the few standing against it, armed with knowledge and lethal intent. Later, Lysandra's voice came over the comms, not addressing the cadre as a whole, but patched directly to my personal unit. Corvus, preliminary analysis of the geological station's deep scans, cross-referenced with recent atmospheric anomalies. She paused, the clinical tone sharpening. We have multiple credible sightings reported over the northern Rockies. Witnesses describe it as insectoid, impossibly large, airborne. Tentative designation, Aetherius raptor. Sky ripper. My stomach tightened. Another impossibility, another hunt. From the deepest caves to the open sky. I looked down at the obsidian shard clutched in my hand. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. This was my life now, descending into darkness, literal and metaphorical, to confront the things that scuttled and shrieked and hunted in the places humanity preferred to forget. Maybe Valerius Cain hadn't offered salvation, but something else. A place where my scars, my knowledge, my proximity to the abyss were not weaknesses, but tools, a weapon. I touched the sharp edge of the claw one last time, the sting grounding me. The cadre would be mobilizing soon, and I would be ready. For Jago. For myself. For whatever else lurked just beyond the edge of the map.